Greetings. This is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today I'd like to take a quick look at the maps used for the spaceship in S3 Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and some of the oddities, problems, and neat things I found while I was redrawing these maps. So the first problem we're going to find is that some of the shaded areas are so dark it makes whatever is written here very hard to see. This isn't just an artifact of the scan. I have a paper copy, an original of this module from back in the 80s, and it's really hard to read sometimes what some of the letters and stuff in this area are. Now the second problem will be these drop chutes here. And this is not immediately obvious, and I only discovered it as I was redrawing. And the problem is that if I put some circles where these drop chutes are, just approximately, it's not perfect, but it's close enough. And as we go through each level of the spaceship, we're going to see that the chutes don't always line up. Sometimes it's a little bit, and it could be like here and here. This could just be because the scan isn't like at exactly the same angle as the other one, but we can see here there's some pretty big problems. See, this one lines up, but the one above it doesn't. So these four are pretty good, but level 3 and level 2 both present some problems, and when I redraw the map, I'm going to adjust this. Now we're on level 2, and I'd like to point out something that I found that's pretty neat in this on this level. And it's this machinery here. So these squares here represent machinery. The module does states that if characters approach it and poke around, they risk getting damage either through an electrical shock or because maybe some piece of clothing might get jammed into some gears and grab them and pull them in until their arm gets damaged. I'm just going to draw these, and one thing we're going to notice, and there's some that's out of alignment, but on a lot of the layers below level 2, so starting with level 3, we see that these squares here that were the machinery correspond to where the lifts are. There are some misalignments here again, so they would need to be corrected. But that would seem to suggest that the machinery here is actually the gears and motors to raise and lower the lifts, which I will assume to be freight elevators. And this brings us to the next problem. And it's that each of these lifts are merely represented by a square of dotted lines. Now, there are no illustrations for the lifts themselves, unlike a lot of the other parts of the starship, but I would assume, seeing that there's machinery at the top of the lifts, that these are simply freight elevators. And so they're like a cage, and they need a door to come in and out. And if they're a door, they would need one of the key cards to let you in or out, because some of the areas that the lifts gives you access to, you need a violet card. Others, you need a brown card. So you may be able to operate any lift with a brown card, but you may not have access to some floors depending on what is on that floor and what it gives access to. So to give you an example, this area can always be reached with a brown card, so these lifts here would have a door that's you can reach with a brown card. Whereas, for example, this cargo hold, you need a violet card to access, so you would need a violet card to open the door here. My experience with key cards is that if there are floors that are restricted, you need to swipe the key card and then you press the button for the corresponding floor. And I would assume this is how it works here. The next problem will be the placement of those doors. As we can see here, there's space all around the lift. So basically that means there's a cage like in the middle of the room. So that's not a big problem, but some of the other floors are a little bit more restricted. So if we go to level 5, we can see that things are fairly restricted. There's always this edge here. If we go to level 4, we again see actually there's a wall here, here, and 10 of the 20 feet are covered here. And it's the same in all 4 corners, which basically means the side of the freight elevator that faces towards the outside of the ship is the only one here that can have a door. And while freight elevators can have 2 doors on opposite ends, it's a lot more complicated to have a door at 90 degrees to the first one. So if we can put the door here all the time, that would be a good thing. Now, this level also has another potential problem, and it's these 4 circles here. The module says that there are hatches here concealed in the platform that lead to the level below, which is level 5. And this level here brings us to these trapdoors in the ceiling. Now, if I draw some circles where these hatches are, and I go and view level 5, I see that they're not all aligned correctly. So again, when redrawing the maps, the position of these hatches should be adjusted so that everything lines up on the 2 layers. And finally, again, let's go back to level 4. This level has one interesting characteristics is that this is all an open area, and there are ramps going down here and going down here. So there's 8 ramps going down from this level. And if we look at level 6, we see that these ramps go up from this level. Now, at first glance, we might think that starting here, we go straight up and we end up in level 4. However, if we look at a side view of the ship, we see that this is 100 feet tall, and a ramp that's, say, 30, 40, 50 feet long is going to be way too steep to be used as a ramp. So, additionally, we see here that the ramps are 20 feet wide, and the same is true of this level. However, if we look at level 5, we see these big blocked out areas that are not accessible. Now, if I draw some rectangles around these areas and I go look at level 4, I can see that the ramps, except for the eastern side, they correspond to the outermost half of these rectangles. And if I look at level 6, again, except for the eastern side, we see it corresponds to the outermost half of these rectangles. Now, looking at the cross section, we see that the ramps are actually 40 feet long, so it corresponds to the width of one of these rectangles. And considering we have to go down 100 feet, but we only have 70 feet to do so, it's not unreasonable to assume it's sort of one ramp leads to about 30 feet long, leads to a 20 by 40 platform that allows you to turn, get to the next ramp, 30 feet, next platform, and you sort of spiral your way down or up from level 4 to level 6 or vice versa. This is also encouraged by the idea that the ramp doesn't have a bottom here. So that would be like going from 20 feet up down to 10 feet up. You move over here and then you go down the ramp here. Now, one problem is that a 3-to-1 ratio for the slope is very steep. It might not sound like it, but it is. So my suggestion is to actually extend the length of the ramps by 10 feet either end. And what this means is in level 5, the shaded area would be longer by 10 feet on either end. The last thing we want to take a look at is a comparison of the cross section with the top view. Let's just hide these. Specifically, one of the areas of concern is the body of water in the middle of these levels here. So again, this may not be immediately clear, but level 4 is level to here. Level 5 is just below it. It's like 5 feet below that. And level 6 is down here. Now, this means the ceiling in level 6 is 40 feet, and there's about 55 feet here that are labeled as atmospheric ballast. Not sure what a ballast is used for in space, but it could just be extra storage for extra atmosphere. If you vent some, you have some extra air that you can breathe. We can assume it's basically empty. The module also states that this area is not accessible except through a wish, a pass wall, or some other magical mean. Now, if we take the observatory in the middle here, first of all, if we take the size of the lake, which has been shaped to be irregular, it is roughly the size of this. And it's not an unreasonable thing to assume that this ledge here, that some other ledges have been built here and there to give it an irregular, more natural feeling shape. However, if I look at level 5, I see that the width of this pool is much larger. It's like 20 feet on both sides than the space as drawn here, which is problematic. So this should be smaller. And finally, if we look at level 6, we actually see that this is the right size. One thing, however, is that there seems to be a very wide partition here before the water, which implies like a 5-foot wide wall, which, considering this is 100 feet deep and that's a lot of water pressure, is not an unreasonable thing to have, like a couple of feet thick wall to support it. So I'd be tempted to thicken the wall here so that it can contain the water properly along the entire height of it. We also see here that the size of the observatory, which isn't mapped in detail here, but space has been allocated for it, does seem to match the width at the bottom here. However, again, if we look at level 5, and to make this easier to see, let us just only have the observation tower. If I look at it, level 5, we're looking at a space about up here. It seems to be about 5 feet short, and certainly the circle seems too small, because this is 20 feet, and if I look at this line, it seems to lead here, and this is 20 feet. So if I line it up like this, I'm seeing almost 10 feet is missing here. So I would be tempted to make this circle larger. And again, we'd have to account, while the outer wall is very thick, the inner wall here should be just as thick, and the viewports would sort of be embedded in there. So that is something we want to think of when we redraw the map. So what does all this look like once we've redrawn it? Like this. So as I scroll down the pages, you can see that the drop chutes are all in the same position. Similarly, if I look at the machinery cages here, and I go through the other levels, I will see that the lifts are all in the same positions. I've also added doors for these lifts so that they can be accessed only with a key card. Finally, on this level, there were some doors, like I've positioned a door over here. However, it used to be here beforehand, which didn't seem very safe. I opened the door and the lift comes down on my head type thing. So I think moving the door is the logical thing to do here. And this was the case on this lift, and this one up here, and this one down here. Strangely enough, not here. The other thing that I forgot to mention is that this ramp here on the original map was actually 10 feet longer. Now, for most dungeons, exact symmetry is not crucial. In fact, it's to be discouraged. Most dungeons were handcrafted, if you will, by artisans. They were good, but there'd be tons of reasons to not have perfect symmetry. However, for something like this, which is the product of an advanced civilization that has automation, standardized parts, symmetry of some sort will be encouraged because it means you can just have interchangeable parts, you can just have a standard design, something modular, and so there's a whole bunch of reasons why a more advanced civilization, technologically advanced, would have standardized. So I've adjusted the length of this ramp to match all the others. On level 5, I've extended the area covered by the ramps. I've also adjusted the position of the lifts, but removed some of the wall. I mean, this is assumed to be either solid or non-accessible, so structural items of some sort. I've just adjusted them. I mean, if we can see here, it's thinner, so having this removed is not a big deal, but it allows us to have the door there on all the lifts. I've also reduced the size of this and adjusted some of the features around it to match. You can see there's a thick partition here and all around here too. And we can see the same thing on level 6, where I've added a very thick partition all around, just to make sure that water stays where it's supposed to stay. And if we want to see what this looks like in color, well, level 1 is fairly much the same, except instead of using lettered codes, I've used colors for the doors that match the colors of the key cards that are needed to open them. Again, not much color on this one, only the brown doors here. Here we have some greenery, some of the vines that are growing. Of course, this has a lot more happening in terms of greenery, water, the vines are growing a bit everywhere. Level 5 and level 6. Oh, and I forgot to show you the redrawn cross section, which you could see the process of getting to this in another video, which I'll post a link to if I think about it. So this was a quick look at the maps for S3 Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. I will post a link so you can download these if you're interested in having them. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, and I'll see you next time.